The Bible explorers have already discovered that the Bible can teach us so many important things. It can teach us how to live the way Jesus did and be just as happy as him. The children have probably never dreamed how exciting the Bible actually is, and now they are ready to find out even more.
Today, I'm excited about what verse we will get. Leo, can't we just start?
Yes, fine by me. Are you ready?
Yes! I wonder what it says.
Lucas, can you read it this time?
Do not repay evil with evil, or insult with insult. Instead, you must bless. For you yourself are called to receive a blessing.
To repay evil with evil. I have heard that is to be mean back when someone is mean to you.
Insult against insult. Maybe that means bad words. Not to say bad words back. If someone says something bad to me.
Instead, you must bless. For you are called to receive a blessing. To bless someone is to do good to someone.
Yes, to get a blessing is to get something good. It means that we should do good to others because we are called, chosen in a way, to experience good done to us too.
That's absolutely right. You children do understand a lot more than you think. God wants to bless us, that is, to do good to us. Since God has called us to this, shouldn't we bless those around us? Don't repay meanness by being mean back. In the Old Testament, there is a story that is a very good example of exactly that. David was a young man who grew up with many older brothers. He was a shepherd boy and looked after his father's animals. At that time in Israel, there was a prophet named Samuel. A prophet is someone who hears God's voice and tells the people what God says. One day, the prophet Samuel came to David's family's home. Samuel had a very important mission. The king of Israel, Saul, had not been faithful to God. He had committed some serious sins. Therefore, God didn't want Saul to continue to be king. God rejected him. It was the prophet Samuel who received this message from God. And now God wanted Samuel to bless and anoint a new man, one who could become king in the future. God sent Samuel to David's family. First of all, David's father fetched the oldest brothers. But Samuel looked at them and thought, no, none of these has been called by God to be king. In the end, they brought David from the fields, although none of the others thought that God would have chosen him. When Samuel saw the young man, he knew it at once. David was the right one. One day, he would become king of Israel. He was called by God to be king. When Samuel had anointed David, he received the Spirit of God. King Saul had had it until then, but now he had lost it. Instead, Saul was filled with dark thoughts. No one knew what Samuel had done, because after the blessing, David continued his life as before. He was a shepherd boy, and Saul was still king. As a shepherd boy, David did everything to take good care of his animals. Both a lion and a bear attacked his sheep. But David put his trust in God and fought against them. With his sling, he killed the wild animals and kept the sheep safe. But there was something else David could do, and that was to play the harp. He was very good at it. Since King Saul had been filled with dark thoughts, he had had many bad days. His servants came up with the idea that they could get the king a harp player. Maybe it would get him into a better mood. One of them knew about David and made him come to the palace. Listening to David play the harp helped King Saul, and he liked David. And that's how David first came to King Saul's palace. Then there was a war in the land, and David went to the war zone to take food to his brothers who were soldiers. When he was there, he saw that the enemy had a giant, and this giant was named Goliath. He often came towards them, bullying the Israelites and mocking God. No one dared fight against him, for he was huge. Then David decided he would fight Goliath. David's brothers just laughed at him. They didn't think he had a chance. But David believed that God, who had helped him fight against bears and lions in the fields, could also help him against this giant. He went to King Saul and asked for permission to fight. The king thought he was too young and weak, but eventually he agreed. Then David got ready to go up against Goliath. He picked up some smooth stones from the stream and put them in his sling. As Goliath approached, David put a stone in the sling and threw it at Goliath. The stone hit him right in his forehead, so he died instantly. When the Israelite soldiers saw what was happening, they got faith and hope that God would enable them to win the war. They attacked and won a great victory. The king was impressed with David and wanted him to stay in his palace, as well as taking part in future wars for Israel. David served the king faithfully, and in war he was braver than anyone else, leading Israel to ever new victories. King Saul should have been happy with all that David had done for him in the country, but instead he began to be envious. He was afraid that the people of the land would begin to like David better than himself. David did everything he could to be good to Saul, but Saul's attitude just got worse and worse. One day, when David was playing the harp for him, Saul threw a spear at him. But David managed to duck out of the way. Then the king began to send David on the most dangerous war missions so he might get killed. But David won all the battles he went into. The king realized that God was with David, and that made him even more angry and envious. David now realized that he had to run away from the king so that he wouldn't be killed. He had to say goodbye to his loved ones and escape, not knowing if he would ever see them again. David didn't talk badly about the king to anyone, and he didn't take revenge. But he ran away and made sure to keep his distance. He also had some friends who accompanied him. King Saul was so determined to kill David that he pursued him with his army. But God made sure Saul didn't reach David. Saul was told that enemies were attacking his land, and so he had to leave and go off to fight this enemy. But as soon as the battle was over, Saul brought with him 3,000 men to take up the hunt after David again. David had been hiding in a castle in the mountains, and the king heard rumors about it. As the king approached, David hid in a cave with his friends. Then it happened that Saul went to this cave alone, not knowing that David and his men were there. He wanted to spend some time alone. David's men saw him coming and told David that now they had the chance. Now they could kill the evil King Saul. David was surprised that they could say something like that. He couldn't imagine killing the king. He spoke strictly to his men, saying they were not allowed to touch Saul. But without Saul noticing it, David crept up and cut off a piece of the king's robe. Even this David found really hard to do because he didn't want to hurt Saul at all. When Saul went out of the cave and down the mountain again, David followed and cried out to him, "Lord, King!" Saul looked back, and David bowed his face to the ground and threw himself down. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen to people who say I'm trying to hurt you? Today you've seen with your own eyes that the Lord led you into my hands in the cave. The men told me to kill you, but I spared you because I thought, I will not lay hands on my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Look here, I have a corner of your robe in my hand. If I had cut off the corner of your robe without killing you, then you must realize and understand I have no evil or betrayal in mind. But you are after me, and you want to kill me." When David had said this to Saul, the king said, "Is it you speaking, my son David?" And then he began to cry, and he said to David, "You are better than I, for you have done good to me, even though I've done evil to you. Today you have shown me how good you are to me. You did not kill me when the Lord had given me into your hand. Who is there who meets his enemy and lets him get away in peace? May the Lord reward you for what you have done to me today. Now I know that you will become king and hold the kingdom of Israel in your hand." Saul returned home after the incident. But once again he set out to persecute David. And once again a similar incident happened in which David saved Saul's life, even though he could have killed him. David did not repay evil with evil. He continued to choose the good and left it to God to take care of Saul. Not long after that, King Saul died in war, and then David became king. And he became a good king for Israel.
David never repaid evil with evil. Instead, he did the good.
He was called to be blessed by God. Therefore, he chose to bless those around him too. So can we, because we are called to receive a blessing.
Yes.